I think that's probably the plan. You know, they've
Well, Jeff, while we're waiting, do we want to start out by talking about some sightings people have had while you're admitting?
Yes, we should.
I will start.
Hello. Well, hold
go
on
ahead.
a second there, Eric. I just want to welcome everybody, first of all. My name is Jeff Davis. I'm the Vice President of the Duluth Audubon Society, and it's good for you all to be joining us today. As Eric is alluding to, we like to start things off with just sharing some sightings, some things that you may have been noticing out and about since the last time we met together in September. And so please remember to unmute yourself if you're going to speak. And yeah, proceed. Eric, go ahead.
I don't know that I have anything specific to say, but I will say I have really seen a really rapid increase in pine siskins and purple finches. Just in the last 2 or 3 days, they have just skyrocketed. And then coincidentally, I read a report from Cornell that said the finches as a whole are on the move this year. And so unlike last year, we actually might see some common redpolls, and we might see some purple finches, and we might see some pine grosbeaks. So that's one thing I've noticed. And the other thing I noticed, and I'd be curious if anyone else on this call has noticed, I've had a lot of bird strikes at my house. I mean, a lot. Like today I had 3, and I probably had 5 this week, and I've gone years without having one. And it's just been a crazy year for that. So anyway, that's all I got.
I would agree on the bird strike. This is Rich Hoeg, and the other place I've started birding, for those of you who haven't, is with Lester Park Golf Course being closed. It's turned into a nice little almost wildlife preserve. Anyhow, in the last 2 mornings, starting about half an hour to 40 minutes after sunrise, I've seen easily 200 bluebirds each. I walk in via the service road, don't block the gate, and I go to the third pond, and then I walk the holes that are just above that, and there's just been a whole slew of bluebirds going through, which is really fun because we generally don't see them in Duluth.
Anyone else have some sightings to share?
This is Jean. I had a ruffed grouse. I live in Lakeside. I had a ruffed grouse a couple weeks ago wandered through my yard. I have never seen one here in Lakeside.
I think we must be neighbors. And I think we've spoken before, like maybe last year on a warbler walk, but because I live in Lakeside, and just 2 days ago, I had a ruffed grouse sitting in my yard too. So
really?
Yeah. And I'm off of 52nd on Ivanhoe. So yeah, so
okay,
'tis the year, I guess.
It must be. I've heard there's a lot of them this year.
And I'm Jan. I live on Park Point. I'm a moderate birder, but what I'm seeing this year that I don't think I've seen in the 20 years that we've lived here is flocks of yellow rumps on the beach, in the yard, all over the place. Are other people getting this?
All over.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And now juncos and white-throated sparrows. I had a wren in my front yard this afternoon, 5 o'clock.
I had my first fox sparrow on Amity Creek in Lakeside this afternoon.
I saw your picture, Rich. Nice picture.
Anyone else have any sightings to share?
Well, there was a redneck grebe on the lake in front of my place this morning too.
Was anybody able to go, for local people, to McQuaid Harbor a couple of weeks ago? There was a Smith's longspur there that hung out for a good 2 days. And in fact, today there was a few reported on the Park Point ball fields. I can't verify that that was really the case, but they were reported. So some fun.
I biked up to McQuaid today, and I didn't have my binoculars, but I got pretty close to some flocks of horned larks that were there, but I didn't see any Smith's longspur.
yesterday during a bike ride where I also went past McQuaid. I got off my bike. I was also watching some horn larks, and a merlin picked one off the ground 3 or 4 feet away from me. I was so surprised.
Anyone else have any sightings to share? As people have been mentioning in my yard, I have quite a few juncos, palm warblers, and just the last couple of days, some American tree sparrows have showed up. So it's kind of some fun old winter transition into winter bird friends, which are good to see. Unless you're dreading winter coming, but then you would not like that. A few more people are showing up here, but I think we can probably proceed. Today we are joined by Rich Hoeg. We are happy to have you, Rich. And you may know Rich from his website, 365 Days of Birding, a project that was to take a picture every day of the year. And now we're 6 years later. So you probably haven't kept up with every single day in that time, but it's been an ongoing labor of love and interest for you that we are all happy about. Richard is also an author and a photographer, lending his talents to those who are writing books, mostly children's books, if I remember seeing them around. And so we welcome Richard to be among us, this very talented local birder that we have among us.
Okay, so I think, is it time for me to take it away?
Yeah, hold on a second. I don't want to mute you. Cool.
All right, so I think I've got myself unmuted and people should be able to hear me. And you're only going to be looking at me for a few seconds here, and then I'll share my screen. The other thing I would just add is I'm also one of the volunteer naturalists up at Saxon Bog, and you might be wondering how we're going to handle this winter with the pandemic. Although things are not 100% set, what we're planning on doing is having a bonfire in the fire pit right next to the Welcome Center. And so when it's not horribly cold, you'll find people like me sitting outside at the Welcome Center, maintaining a socially safe distance, but only the staff will be allowed to go inside so we can warm up, and the rest of you will have your cars anyhow. So anyhow, we're looking forward to seeing you. Generally open on about the 7th or 8th of December. So I'm going to share my screen now. And I have been privileged for basically the last year now to have spent time with what I call the Amity Owls, which are a family of great horned owls. In fact, just within the last week, the parents have started hooting again to express their love for one another and get ready for another year of raising some kids. They're not doing much of a song or chorus. It's only for a few minutes now every night, but come late November or December, that will change dramatically. But anyhow, I'm going to work you through, they raised triplets this year, and work you through some photographs and show you how things, just a second, I need to, there, okay. I just needed to do one thing with Zoom so I could think. So the first period was the pre-nesting period. And basically that was leading up to February 8th. This is the mom. And how I found the nest, and I'm not going to reveal the location, but the owls are definitely in the Lester Amity Park area, was I live right below the first bridge on Seven Bridges Road. And about an hour and a quarter, hour and a half after sunset, I'd hear the two parent owls start hooting. Well, in primarily January, I would go out hiking at night, an hour and a half after sunset, have a flashlight, and over the course of many, many evenings, I narrowed it down to where they were hooting from, and eventually figured out where they were likely to be nesting. Now, in terms of habitat, and I confirmed this with some other friends, these owls like pine groves on rivers. I know that was a pair of nesting great horned owls up near Chester Bowl this year. I've got another friend who lives near the mouth of the Sucker River, and there was a pair of great horned owls there who are already nesting. I happened to attend French River Lutheran, and there were some owls there. The point is, the great horned owls like pine groves because it protects them and gives them a place to hopefully raise their young, protects them not only from things like crows, but also the weather. And I've found that the streams probably provide, more prey opportunities and things like that. So literally starting right now, the owls in my neighborhood have started hooting again, and this is the mom. And so as we go through the presentation, you'll see this slide a number of times, and it's just to show for the next number of photographs what period we're talking about. And so the mom laid her first egg back on February 8th of last year, and the first egg hatched approximately mid-March. So this photograph I took in early February, and the mother female owl does all the incubating. She would not leave the nest even to hunt. The male would bring her food. So from, I think it was about February 8th when she first was on the nest to approximately April 8th, or 60 days, she never left the nest. I mean, I'm not a mom, but I can't imagine. I've got 3 kids and now 6 grandkids if I wasn't allowed to get out of the house occasionally when they were younger. This is the male. He would always be nearby if he wasn't out hunting. Could be hard to find, but he always had line of sight to the nest. So as I mentioned, the first chick hatched about the middle of March. And here you can see a photo. Now, just to let you know, I am never near the owls. I have a Canon SX60 camera, which has a optical zoom of 60 magnification, which would be about 1400 millimeter lens for those of you that to get this particular photograph, I actually am moving away from the nest. The nest was about 40 feet up in the tree, a big white pine. And like many places in Duluth, it's hilly. And so I actually walked quite a ways away from the nest. I probably took this photograph from 100 yards away, maybe even further, so I could get up and get this angle. And you can see the two. This was taken, about to the middle of March, March 16th, March 17th. The first owlet hatched about a week before the youngest. And so just a few more pictures. And you can see here now, I'm probably in the latter part of March. The owlet you're seeing is more than likely a week and a half or 2 old. Once again, the male brings all the food and the mom provides. Now, to begin with, I had no clue how many owlets there were. I didn't know. I knew there was one. And for the longest period, until almost the middle of April, I did not know there were triplets. You just can't get a view of them. They're up high in the tree. And, if you look at this with binoculars, there's some fuzzballs, but that's about all you can figure out. Now, great horned owls do not make their own nests. They appropriate nests that a hawk has made, something else. And so if you are trying to find an owl nest and you hear one hooting in an appropriate habitat even before they've gone on the nest to lay the first egg. If you see an old owl nest or even a big squirrel nest, it's possible they may choose to use that. And here, backlit by the sun, a couple more pictures. This is one of my favorite. Still at this point, latter part of March, early April, I had no clue as to how many owlets there were. So as far as young chicks, from early to mid-April, so starting about 2 weeks old. Now, the timeline that I'm showing you, in fact, there is a great resource, and hopefully, which I used, a BirdCam FAQ from All About Birds, which is also obviously the Cornell School of Ornithology. And so I used this site to check some of the times and things I was experiencing. And then also, for those of you who know how Sparky Stenzos, Sparky's a good friend, and I would ask Sparky a few questions because I was just curious when I might expect things to happen. And obviously the nest is open to the weather, and here you can see some snow. This is the dad watching, scratching, doing some grooming. And now this picture, this is the mom, and you can tell the mom and the dad apart, mainly because the female great horned owl is almost a fourth, if not a third, bigger than the male owl. Quite frankly, the male owl is sort of short and has almost a paunchy kind of belly. And this was on about April 8th. This was the first day that I walked over, and the mom was not on the nest, but then she flew back, fairly quickly. But that was the very first time I saw her go away. And I did confirm through my own research that that's normal, 60 days sitting on the nest. And now I knew there were 2 owlets. And I took this picture actually lying on the ground. The owlet was just staring down at the ground. It's about 40, 45 feet above me, and I'm just stretched out on the ground looking straight up. And they would move to find the sun. And remember, you know what northern Minnesota weather's like in late March, early April. We had some really cold days, and you get a cold wind. And so they were very, they would move around the trunk as much as they could to try and find the sun. And now the other thing is, this is actually, probably about mid-April. This is the mother. One of the parents was always watching the nest at this point. Now, it didn't mean that they were in the nest tree. I could find the mom or the dad as far as 150 yards away, but they always had perfect line of sight to the nest. In this case, the mom is in this little pocket where it's protected from above, so the crows really couldn't find it, but it could easily see the nest. And it could see me too. Believe it or not, I'm almost 100 yards away, but it knew I was there. Once again, even though we're almost 3 or 4 weeks into their being, since they were hatched, I'm still not certain whether there's 2 or 3 owlets. Now, the other thing is, they will reuse nests on occasion, but I can guarantee you the nest that they were in this year, they won't be using. They just totally destroyed it. And you can see some of the sticks and things and whatnot. Just every day I'd come over there and there'd be more stuff on the ground. This was in the evening, just one of my favorite pictures where they looked down at me. And okay, food discussion. This was fascinating. For instance, this is right underneath the nest. Yeah, it's half a rabbit. I would come over in the morning, and it got to be something I do every day. I'd go right under the nest because probably 1 out of every 4 days, once the owlets got a little bit bigger, I called it my offerings from the owl gods. They were sloppy. I saw dead robins, decapitated crows. I saw part of a barred owl. I saw rats, obviously lots of rabbits. When the flickers started migrating through during the migration, suddenly there were yellow feathers from northern flickers underneath the nest. You could tell what was happening in the woods around based upon the food offerings. And I think that my conjecture is that the parents were bringing the food to the young and getting them in the habit of having, at this point, which is the middle of April or so, to start tearing it apart themselves. And what was sort of interesting, you're seeing here on the right a big, dead, partially hollow log. Fairly early on, I wasn't the only person checking underneath the nest every day. There were fox tracks. And it was obvious the fox had figured out that, you know, there was manna from heaven coming down. It was getting some easy food. And I actually got to the point where I would put whatever I found, if it had fallen somewhere else, on top of this log, and by the next morning it'd be gone. Okay, now you're seeing, once again, about a month old. And I think one of the owlets is, it's some crow at this point. And the parents would come in and deliver specifically to one bird. And surprisingly, once that delivery had been made, there wasn't too much fighting. I think at this point, there's probably plenty of prey in the lakeside area. And then this time, I think it might have been some rabbit, or at least some sort of furry thing that was down there. And I never got a picture of the male owl delivering food, only because he tended to come in after it was too dark. And so no photography possible. All right, branching. Now, those earlier pictures were all taken as the owlets could walk right by the nest. Branching is when they can start doing some hopping, and they really start exploring, but they can't fly. This is about 5 to 6 weeks old. You'd find this talked about in the Cornell timeline. And anyhow, so we're talking, if they were born in mid-March, we're, you know, mid to late April. And so these photographs, now I never knew where they'd be in the pine tree, but I knew they'd be in the pine tree. The best time was always either first thing in the morning or last thing in the afternoon. Some owls, obviously up in Saxon Bog, great gray owls, you know, you can see them sometimes during the day. If you want to go look at snowy owls over in Superior, they might hunt an hour and a half or two before sundown. These great horned owls, the parents very, very rarely started hunting before sunset. So this was where this guy has really gotten to the point where it can do some branching and do some hopping and get up. That was the first time I ever saw them on different branches. And this is a distance of 3 or 4 feet. And I wish I could have seen it happen just to figure out, you know, the talons at this point are pretty good, whether it hopped or whether it actually sort of walked like Spider-Man up the tree. Okay, obviously they can't protect themselves from the weather. This was pretty funny. I was actually concerned about it. Not, you know, you start to become protective like a parent. And when we started getting some rain where it would be 38, 39 degrees and downpours, I'd go over there really concerned that the owls might get hypothermia, which may be a stupid thing, but actually I would find that the female owl would generally come back to the nest even as these owlets were getting big to help lend its warmth. And you can see they don't look real happy with the situation. And some of my favorite photographs just, you know, nobody likes being wet. So now I obviously know there's triplets. In a moment, we'll move on to the next stage. And just a picture of the mom. This is like 15 minutes after sunrise. She's sitting probably 50 yards from the nest. So first flight. This was a very, very interesting few days, and I was lucky enough to experience it. So this was the first flight the night before that actually they did some of them. And I knew something was different just because these particular two owls were sitting or perched on the white pine. And have you ever seen an owl, when they're hunting, particularly great grays, they bob and swing their head up and down and around, and they started doing that. And I knew they couldn't be hunting because I'd never even seen them fly, but they stare at a spot probably 10 feet away, and for 3 or 4 minutes they do this head bobbing looking, and then suddenly I figured out they were trying to figure out, they were doing the computing, can they make a short flight? And so then I knew when they were going to do their first short flights, and it was just fascinating to watch because they telegraph it, and then they'd only go, like I say, 5, 6, 8 feet. And it's sort of interesting. I have a cabin north of Grand Rapids, a tiny cabin about 30 miles north. And this summer I saw a bald eagle chick do its first flight. And its first flight, it glided a couple hundred yards and then did it. Sorry, I mean, they're made for gliding. As opposed to great horned owls, they're made for maneuvering and diving and whatnot, you know, in a forest. My point being, they're good flyers, but they're not a glider. And so they were very, very weak. And I read on the Cornell site that after these first couple flights, they might need to rest for an hour, 2 or 3, just because their wing muscles weren't developed. Well, that's what happened the very next morning. So this was the first night where I saw them doing flights. The next morning, it's 4:45 in the morning, and I'm up. And, you know, that time of year, it's starting to get light, and I just hear the most incredible racket. And I realize, even though it isn't sunrise for 20, 25 minutes yet, that, I don't know, 40 or so crows are attacking the owls. So I walk the trails, and I'm actually on a cogs trail, and suddenly I hear this clucking noise, and this owlet, not too surprisingly, was trying to scare me. It was on the ground, and I actually didn't even know it was on the ground at first until I heard the clacking and turned around, and here he's trying to make himself look bigger than he is. Well, the reason I didn't know he was there to begin with, because I saw these owls dive, not owls, excuse me, crows dive bombing towards the ground. They were after this owlet, and anyhow, I scared away the crows. The 2 other owlets were up in a tree nearby. And what was interesting, suddenly both parents arrived. They probably were nearby. They were on a tree. At this point, the parent is probably only about 20 feet above me. And they went after the crows. Now that I had at least gotten them away from the kids on the ground, or the one owlet on the ground, the two parent owls, they launched the most nasty attack that I have ever seen in my life. Not that I've seen a lot of attacks like that, but I've seen a fair amount now. And they drove the crows really out of the neighborhood. Well, then I remembered from reading on the Cornell site that the tree and the area that I found this owlet on the ground was about 300 yards from the nest tree. And it was about 6:30 in the morning, and with all the people that were now hiking because of the pandemic, I knew the owlet was okay. I didn't want well-wishers and people to think, oh, this owlet's on the ground, it needs taken care of. So what I did next is I herded it off the trail, because I didn't want it on a trail, down into a very thick thicket of trees about 30 or 40 yards away. Now, the other thing is where these owls have nested, there's definitely fox, there's definitely coyote, and I knew it couldn't fly at this point. So I actually did some babysitting. I sat about 30 yards away for 2 hours. And because that was the time period, within about 2 hours, I knew people would start walking the trails, and then any of the predators that might take out this owl wouldn't be around anymore. Anyhow, within about 2 hours, it finally got its strength back, and it flew up into the tree. So I had an owl babysitting job that day, and it was just a fantastic experience for me. Okay, starting basically the month of May, now that can fly, they were in other trees in the nest area. Now, if you think about Duluth in May, there aren't any leaves out until the latter part of May. So they stayed in the pine grove area because that gives them some protection. So sometimes I could find them, sometimes I couldn't. You know, I generally get over there right at sunrise, and there'd be days where I'd get photos like this and just really enjoy the experience. There'd be other days where they'd move 300 or 400 yards away. At times they would screech, and if they screeched, that obviously helped me find them. And this was a big white pine that for a period of a week, they liked to hang out there, and I liked having them hang out. I'm probably 120 yards away and uphill, which actually helps. So I'm almost, I'm probably only height-wise, only 20 or 25 feet below them. This is one of my favorite photos. For me, for some reason, this one owl is sort of bragging that it's better than the other ones or something, but obviously it's not. Now, in terms of screeching, once a little bit later than this, by about the last part of May, they started learning how to hunt. And they would definitely, if one of the parents was around, they would start begging like crazy. And there was a period of time for about a month and a half where probably every other night they would fly across Amity Creek and land in my own yard, and they would be hunting the 60th Avenue East area. And then I found from some other people I talked to, they often would go over and hunt Lester Park Golf Course. And the way we figured this out is just by hearing where they were screeching. And I've got a little recording here I made at 3 a.m. About the 1st of July. The owlets literally were in a dead tree outside my bedroom window. So just a second. So hopefully you could hear that when I was running it off my phone. But basically, at night, if you ever hear a screeching like that, it's almost assuredly an owl. Barred owl young make screeching like that. Great horned owls young make screeching like that. The only real difference as they get older is they can do more volume and the pitch starts to vary a little bit. And they're so anyhow, that's how I knew that they were hunting my house, or I should say my yard at night. And it actually got to the point, we always sleep with the windows open, that if they landed on this one particular tree, which they often did, they started screeching. I'd wake up. I thought it was pretty neat. So anyhow, here they are. I never got a picture of all four, basically because this is the female owl. The male owl would only come in if it was after dark and it was delivering food, but it was, you've seen photographs. I saw it a lot, just never came in. So this was sort of neat. In terms of things that I learned about owl behavior, if you look at their eyes, they're sort of half masked, and before you know it, they were sleeping. This was really common, and what I mean by that, I would get over there at sunrise. So if sunrise was 6 a.m., I'd be over there at 6 a.m. If sunrise was 5:30, I'd be over there at 5:30. If sunrise was 6:30. What I found was the owls tended to sleep right at sunrise, and then maybe an hour or so after sunrise, they'd wake up, and it was almost like, let me go back to that picture. They knew they needed to do a better job of hiding to get away from crows. The other thing was, as we have gone through the summer, the youngsters would often hunt an hour, hour and a half after sunrise deep in the forest, so that was sort of fun to watch. So, but right at sunrise, they almost always were sleeping. The other thing I learned, they do not like noise. So if I stepped on a stick, even a small stick, and it broke, oh man, that would spook them. But as long as I moved slowly, to take some of these pictures, I might see them in a tree a ways away, and to move 40 yards might take me 15 minutes as I go, because I would be looking at the ground, planting each foot real carefully, just because I know how much they hated noise. And this was the same day. Once again, it's now probably about an hour and a half after sunrise. They'd wake up, they'd do some grooming, and interestingly enough, I'm convinced, and I have no way of proving this, that there's two male owlets and a female owlet, because the two younger ones are smaller, even now later in the summer, and they'd hang out together, whereas the other one wouldn't. This is the mom at sunset. So now we're getting, into June, well, late May. They're almost full grown, but they still obviously have down. More rain. This is how much they can hide. Okay, this morning when I saw them, I knew there were two owlets. I was watching these two for 10 minutes until I suddenly realized this guy appeared, that all three were up there. It's just, it's amazing how they can be there and you don't see them. So fledged in the forest, and what I mean by that, leaves come out here, late May, and by that point, they're ready to start moving around. And this whole process makes sense. So the first egg was laid on February 8th, and what that allowed is when these owlets get a really large appetite, squirrels, rabbits, chipmunks, migrating birds. As these guys get big, there's lots of food around. And then come early summer, as they're starting to learn to hunt, there's less things. So now here we are in June, the leaves are out. This is actually the mom. And at this point, sometimes they'd be 2 or 3 miles up the Lester Park ski trails. And if you wonder how I found them, crows are incredibly good at finding owls. And not just crows, but even when they're around the nest area, you need to listen to what the other animals are telling you. One flicker was often enough to tell me an owl was around, or if the robins started clucking. People think of, listening for crows and chickadees, but I learned flickers would tell. One flicker, they have a certain alarm call. Same thing, one robin, you can tell that they're upset. And then once again, we're in, this is probably the middle of June, and the young owls are not particularly good at picking hiding spots, whereas their parents are. So that's part of the reason the crows will find them. And not that these photos are real good, but to get a picture of a crow attack in process just was sort of neat. So obviously here's the owlet and a crow. And looking down at me saying, do you look what I have to put up with? And remember, this is way up high in this tree. I mean, I'm nowhere close, but then look who's boss. Even though, maybe a little over 2 months old, and the crow decided that maybe this owlet packed a little more punch than it realized. And then it looked at me again and said, hey, see, I can do it. I really enjoyed that experience because it almost felt like it was bragging, which it couldn't be. Very late August. So I took this picture, obviously right before Labor Day. And I think these are both 2 male owls. You can see now, if they were born in the middle to the 3rd week of March, they look like full-grown adults at this point. The way I'd also find them is I'd be walking in the woods. You look for whitewash on the thimbleberries bushes. And the thing I was surprised to learn was during the nesting period, they were always up high in the trees. Once they got older and would start learning how to hunt, I would find the owls sometimes even on the ground, but often no more than 20 feet up in a tree. So they weren't up high. And then I call one owl Hoot, which I think is a female. She's the one that hangs out by herself. I don't really know first. And mentioned that I have written a book, and this will be one advertisement. My website, which is 365 Days of Birds. If you go to my website, from any page, I have this menuing. If you go to Do You Hoot, anybody can download for free my children's book about the story of the Amity Owls. It's PDF, and I've combined for 3 other children's books with Susan Larson-Kidd, who's a early childhood development, but we give away all of our books. So while if you want a printed copy, that obviously costs us, but if you want to, during this pandemic, family time is so important. We've given away hundreds of copies of each of these books and want to encourage you to do so. And let's see, with that, I'd be happy to, I'm going to stop screen sharing and be happy to answer any questions. I believe you can unmute yourself, if I'm not mistaken. Go ahead. I don't know, Alan, if that's just a hand on your screen or you're wanting to ask a question.
I was applauding your presentation.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Which you know, it's clear that these owls had good parents who provided a lot of food because they didn't seem very aggressive towards one another. But what did you read at the Cornell site about owl aggression towards siblings?
Well, actually, what I read on the Cornell site is seeing triplets is pretty unusual for a northern boreal forest. The average owl nest through Canada and northern Minnesota is something like 1.3 young. So that would obviously indicate there's less prey around. Now, for those of you who have been following and have done a lot of birding for raptors over the last few years, within the last year or two, up in Saxon Bog, the number of voles and mice is up dramatically. And we've seen an increase in the number of nesting great horned owls, not great horned owls, great grays. So I think right now, prey is up. And then the other thing is, we humans, especially if you live right here in Lakeside with these homes, that there was good reason that the owls were coming over to my house every night. They weren't hunting my yard necessarily, but they'd fly across the creek and then they'd spread out along 60th. So we generate stuff that mice, rats, and whatnot like.
Rich, this is Elias.
Yes.
Were you surprised to see that third owlet, or were you suspecting?
Yeah, I was. In fact, I thought there was two. And then if you remember that really ugly, there was a really, really ugly day. Not that we don't have ugly weather a lot sometimes at the time of year in Duluth, but with rain and sleet, and there was like 40 or 50-mile-an-hour winds. And I didn't see the third owlet for like 2.5 weeks after that. And those of you who follow my blog and know me, I was totally convinced that one of the owlets had died and was telling people that. Yeah, I was very surprised to see 3 ultimately. And I didn't know there were 3 owlets till well into April. And if you figure the first one was born about the 16th of March,
How big a territory do they need? Will they be sticking around or going elsewhere?
Well, my parent owls are already back in the territory. They're hooting now. The song, it isn't very long, but I know 2 years ago, I believe there was a pair of great horned owls around 46th or so in Lakeside. And so I don't know if that pair is still around. So I guess that they were able to have territory, that close together. And then once again, it's obvious they like these pine areas for protection. And I think they probably generates prey just because my friend who lives on the Sucker River has great horned owls. I know we've got some near French River Lutheran. I know they had some up near Chester Bowl. And those are all sort of the same kind of habitat. These particular owls I've seen as far north, if you know where the deeps are, I have personally seen them 2 miles north of the deeps off the ski trails. And once again, I know they have hunted Lester Park Golf Course. So that's getting to be a fairly large area.
It would be interesting to know what if they're by their DNA, if all these area owls are related, if
Related.
they're generations of owls that have moved from one white pine forest to another as they've reproduced.
Yeah, it was interesting also finding the remains of the barred owl. Great horned owls are king and queens of the roost, so to speak. And no other owl should bother even trying to live in the area.
So Rich, you said the male and female are back now on the nest hooting again. do they leave for a while, or were they just quiet?
They're quiet. So
Okay.
during this whole period, the youngsters would make noise, but the parents pretty much, they stopped hooting unless sometimes they'd hoot if like there was a major crow attack. If they were upset, they'd make noises and things like that. But in terms of, mating calls, if I was trying to find great horned owls, but the best period is really January, because that's when they're going to be, at least here locally in Duluth, getting on what they're interested in. But I want to say for the first month, so through mid-February to late February, I'd hear them hooting, but then they shut up. And it's only in the last week they've started singing again.
It strikes me that out at Park Point beyond the airport, there are also some tall white pines. And I'm just wondering if anybody here has observed great horned owls out in that area of Park Point or over on the Superior Point.
I haven't heard of any reports out there, but that doesn't mean there aren't any. Well, it's been a fun experience, and with the pandemic, I mean, I would have been happy to be watching these owls regardless, but I couldn't go anywhere. So my wife would say, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going over to see the owls." I go over there 3 or 4 times a day, and oh, you don't want to know how many photographs I took, but especially, not obviously COVID-19 is it is a very serious thing. But if you remember back in March, I think we were all even more scared at that point, at least I was. And, we were all sheltering at home. I think we weren't even seeing our own kids and grandkids at that point. And so I couldn't see my kids and grandkids, but I could see my owls. So.
It would be interesting if they've done studies on the fact that crows can identify people, whether they're friendly or unfriendly. And it would be interesting that these owls became quite tolerant of your presence. They clearly must have recognized you. And it would just be, I thought that was interesting that you really kind of established a relationship with them over the course of of these last 7 months. And it would be interesting if in the future they will continue to know who you are,
I think they know who I am, as long as I do certain things, which is one, move very, very slowly. And I can't stress that too much. When I say I could see them and to move 30 yards, 40 yards, I could take 15 minutes to do that. They really, really, really hate noise. I can't stress that too much. And I've seen the same thing. I was just watching some great gray owls up in Saxon Bog about a week ago. And at this time of year, people think you want to be in the car. That's exactly wrong, because if it's dry, like it often is in the fall, the sound of your car tires, even you're only going 4 or 5 miles an hour on that gravel, is just so noisy. You're much better off getting out of the car, but then very slowly. They'll put up with you if you go very, very slowly and quiet.
Any additional questions or comments?
Really good series.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. And remember, you can get a free PDF if you want of the book.
Thank
And
you
thank-
so much.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
thank you, Rich. It was great.
Thank you.
you very much.
Thank you for being with us here tonight. If anyone else is interested, we have monthly programs